I am officially 40 weeks pregnant, and while I am waiting for this little guy to debut, I decided to record a couple of episodes on how to financially and mentally prepare for going on maternity leave and having a baby. I've learned so much over the past 9 months on how to prepare, and so I wanted to share this information with you. I decided to have my really good friend Christina Wanta join me on this episode, and the reason why is because she is a corporate employee and I'm an entrepreneur. So we have two different experiences and perspectives on the things that we had to do to prepare for maternity leave. So she's going to be sharing that corporate perspective, and I'm going to be sharing the perspective of an entrepreneur. The way that we've broken up this episode series is there are 2 parts. In part 1, this episode right here, we're really going to be talking about before maternity leave, all of the things that you need to start preparing for. So thinking about loss of income if you don't have paid maternity leave or paternity leave at your company. I know as an entrepreneur, we do not have that. We're going to be talking about insurance benefits. We're going to be talking about the most expensive items that you need to be saving for in order to prepare for your baby. In part 2 of this series, we're actually going to talk about your time off during maternity leave, and we're going to be talking about after maternity leave, returning back to work, and potentially sending your kid to daycare in the event that that's what you choose to do. Let's dive in. Christina Wanta, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you here. Christina, you are a mom of 2, and you've been through this a couple times now. Tell me what it was like for you when you first found out you were pregnant for that first time. And did you have any financial fear come up when that first happened?
Yeah, so maybe I'll back up and explain not the moment of finding out I was pregnant, but the moment before the moment, which is planning the births of my eventual babies and how that came to be with my husband. I remember being on a solo vacation and I was newly married and I was like, I know I want to have babies. I know I want to have 2 babies and I have to time this appropriately so that they're the right distance apart and so that my career was at a certain point. And so I wrote down in my notebook, first baby, 2019. Second baby, 2022. When I came back from my vacation, my husband found these notes and became a big joke, still a running joke because I was basically planning our life independent of him. And he, as we know, it takes 2 to tango with having a child. So that sort of became a big joke. I did have my first baby in 2019. Her name is JoJo. She is now 4. I remember that first moment just being so utterly excited. And then the moment of finding out she was a girl, I got got pink roses and I put them in my back seat and I had my husband go. I was like, can you go pick up the groceries in the car? He picked out the pink roses. I would thought he was going to immediately figure out what I was talking about. He had no idea.
He's like, oh yeah, pink roses.
Pink roses. In terms of financial fears, I think the biggest thing for me was around thinking about how do I create a solid career and an identity in that before embarking on parenting and parenthood. And money is so tied up in that way because it was important for me to have a solid base in my career, a feeling of upward mobility, a feeling like I was in a good company with good benefits, which I know we'll talk about. And so that was primarily where my head was at and why timing it in the way I did was very intentional for me.
So let's talk about before maternity leave, that moment of being like, okay, I'm pregnant to this baby is coming and I need to make sure that I have everything ready financially and stuff in your house. We're going to talk about that too. So tell me, what was your process with your employer when you found out you were pregnant?
The first thing I did was wanting to really know my benefits and wanting to be thoughtful about when do I tell my team and my boss around this. And the reason why that was important to me is to separate talking and knowing about my benefits and speaking with HR, separating that from my team is because I think it's so important whether or not you're an entrepreneur or you work for a company that's just self-advocacy and just knowing what you have available to you. And so the first thing I did was meet with HR just to understand, okay, what are my benefits? What are the benefits available to me at the company in terms of maternity leave? What is my current insurance provider and understanding what do I need to change my insurance provider when it's open enrollment? So I went sort of that route of self-advocacy, talking directly with my HR and understanding how should I manage speaking to my boss around it, speaking to my team about it. At what point are you supposed to tell people that? Is it when you're showing? I mean, you technically don't have to tell them at any point. And now we live in a remote world where you could go pregnant and no one would ever know. I sort of separated those two things and starting with HR and understanding what's available to me and what are my benefits.
And what did you find? Were you surprised at all at any of the benefits that you had through your employer?
I had 12 weeks paid, which at the time felt like a really healthy time off and paid time off. And now, I had a friend who was living in England at the time and she's like, oh, I got a whole year off. So, I mean, you can think about it globally and that sort of just a dent in what women should have and but mothers and fathers should have sort of access to in terms of leave, paid leave. But I felt like that was reasonable and healthy. And then they had other perks like when you were pregnant, you could park closer to the building. I actually think it's good to walk a little farther, to sort of get your body moving. So that was one sort of like an expectant mother sign of so you can park a little closer. But they also had a benefit called a bassinet called SNOO, which some of you might have heard. I know Whitney, you're renting one. And so they gave free SNOO rental. So that it was a little bit of both of like, oh, these are kind of like nice perks, and then understanding like taking leave and the process of taking leave, which ended up being kind of a pain in the butt.
So, great thing for people to consider is starting with HR first and then actually going to their team or their boss to let them know they're pregnant. And I'm curious, when did you make that decision to let your team and your boss know?
When I was starting to know that I was going to start to show. So physically, when I was in a position where I couldn't really hide it anymore. So there was like a physical element to it, but there was also a project element to it. I really wanted to hand off my work in a thoughtful way and have a leave plan because I just thought that was only fair, from to my colleagues. And so I wanted to be strategic about like what are the projects that I was taking on and what was in flight that I was owning that I needed to hand off. But I also didn't feel like I had to do it right away because then it was kicking up energy that I didn't need to kick up until I needed to.
I think that's really smart. I know Craig had a very interesting experience when he was telling his team about paternity leave. He also had 12 weeks paid paternity leave. One of the things that you and I had discussed was the FMLA protection. And I know neither of us are attorneys, but I do think it's something important to touch on because you had actually mentioned it in our notes. So can you just like give a high overview of the FMLA protection? You know it.
Disclaimer, I'm not an attorney. However, FMLA stands for Family Medical Leave Act. And it's a state law that while you take leave, whether it's medical leave because you're pregnant, medical leave because you have a sick family member, whatever those are, surgery, whatever those sort of leave reasons are, your job is protected. So they can't backfill your role, they can't replace your role, they can't fire you. My company is also California based, which is a different period of time. And it's not uncommon for I think a company to have the paid leave match the sort of FEMLA paid leave, but also as protected as an employee for 12 weeks.
I think that's so important because it can feel so vulnerable just to say, hey, I'm going to walk away from my job and my projects and my role and everything, every way that for me, at least, I feel purposeful as a human in the world. I mean, as an Enneagram 3, for those of you that are familiar with Enneagram, I'm an Enneagram 3. And so my professional life is incredibly important to me. And it's a huge definer of my identity. And I think for a lot of people, it can feel that way. It can be a little nerve wracking. Like, how did you feel about that?
I now need to know what my Enneagram is. I don't even know what that is. So I'm excited to explore that separately. Identity plays such a big role in this whole journey, your professional identity, but also your identity as like a woman becoming a mother who's also has a spouse potentially and the relationship to that. And maybe you're a manager at work and you have direct reports. It was profound to me how the individual me was just spawning. It was building. It was just like getting bigger of my role and my identity. I remember the feeling, particularly about leaving the job for 12 weeks. I definitely had some nerves around that. I thought like, what's going to happen when I come back? Am I going to be needed? Am I going to be valued? Like, yeah, my job is protected, but so much can happen in 3 months, as we all know. And so I definitely had a little bit of a concern around that. And Then I know we'll get into it when the baby comes, you sort of, it sort of dissipates a little bit because your primary job just changes entirely. There was the nerves of identity leading up, and then it shifts again and to focus on something new, which is your baby.
Which I'm very excited about because I am still in this before maternity leave, although I really hope not that much longer. But I'm still in that period, and there I definitely have a lot of nerves as it relates to my business. So the way that I had to prepare was a little bit different than you. The first thing that I really had to do was number one, I didn't get any paid maternity leave. And for those of you that are entrepreneurs, you can relate, right? Like we don't get paid maternity leave. It's just the work that we do leading up to pregnancy that can either position us well for our time off or keep us working and feeling really locked into our businesses. And I knew for me, that was not what I wanted. I am a recovering workaholic. And so I've really had to spend the last year to separate my identity, like who I am as a person, from my job. So this was one of those things that I was like, okay, this is going to be a personal growth and a professional growth exercise for me. But I know when I have this baby, I'm only going to have maybe, hopefully, 2 children. And I want this experience to be really special. I want to be able to give my time and energy and love exclusively to this baby while he's so young. And I have a mentor. She's 75. And the reason why I love her as my mentor is because she has such a broad perspective on life. And she can really help me refocus and recenter on what is actually most important. The 3 months after you have your child, 3, 6 months, whatever, you get to have, I believe are like some of the most important, precious moments that you get to have with your child. Maybe that's not true, but for me, it just feels really special. So I knew that I did not want to work during maternity leave. Now, there may be some of you listening to this podcast that are thinking, that's not for me. Like, I want 1 week postpartum and I want to be back in the office. And truly, there's nothing wrong with that. This is just a matter of preference. But I'm going to speak about what I did in my business to make sure that I could be in a position where I really didn't have to work. So the first thing that I did is I went through all of my business expenses and I got rid of anything, I mean anything that was unnecessary. I reduced my business expenses from $10,000 a month to $4,000 a month. That meant I had to let go of my operations manager. I had to let go of my designer. I had to let go of a lot of the subscriptions that I was using that I wasn't going to be using during my maternity leave. I also put any memberships on freeze. Like I froze everything that I could freeze so I can start back up in January when I actually get back to working. And I just reduced everything down. Now, if you have a large cushion in your business accounts, you may not need to do this. The position that I was in financially, in order for me to pay my fixed expenses for my business and continue to pay me any kind of salary, I did need to do that. So I cut my business expenses way down during my maternity leave. I also made sure that I really understood the financial runway of my business. Y'all, this is so important for entrepreneurs. Even if you are not having a baby, you still want to know your numbers for your business. So I made sure I do have about 3.5, 4 months financial runway, which will pay for all of my fixed expenses and continue to pay me while I'm out. It's smaller than what I had originally intended and wanted. However, it's enough for my family. And I think for me, I'm really kind of playing with this idea of enough right now. So that was my process for really preparing financially for my loss of income. Now, I want us to move into all of the stuff that you have to get for your baby. I was completely overwhelmed by this initially because I thought that we were going to be spending like thousands of dollars on getting everything that we needed. And I was very happy when I found I had a very different experience. So, Christina, what was your experience with getting all of this stuff? And we can go through some of the most expensive things. But tell me how that was for you.
I was also overwhelmed, and partly because I am a very slow buyer and decision maker, partly because I like to curate things in a way that's intentional, and I know with babies comes a lot of stuff. So I'm like, if I'm gonna have a lot of stuff, it better look cute. I did not want to have a baby shower in a traditional sense because I just didn't want to have that experience of having to open gifts in front of people. But I know that people want to give. So I had a registry, which I curated from this amazing blogger who basically told me what to buy. And then I just got so many hand me downs. And I would try to find things that were like affordable for things that I knew were temporary or like ephemeral that I knew would go away. So, as an example, a crib. Cribs can be $1,000 if you want them to be. I found one at IKEA that was $90. And I was like, this is still pretty cute. So I tried to weigh like what would be something that I would want to keep for a long time, maybe spend a little bit more money on that. What is something that I know someone will want to buy for me that is more expensive? So and then so many clothes hand-me-downs, which are so special too, is just getting things from other friends who have had babies and no longer need it.
I was so surprised by that. I did not even know that that was a thing. I did not expect so many friends to be like, "Hey, do you have this? Do you want this? Do you want to
Mhm.
borrow that?" I was like, "Wow, I feel like I'm entering into a community that I
Mhm.
didn't even know existed." I felt so loved and cared for through that process of just I mean, even you reached out. You're like, "I have these 2 things. Do you want them?" And that just happened over and over. And ultimately, I spent very, very little money, which I
Mm.
was really surprised about. So let's talk about some of the most expensive purchases that you made preparing for baby.
So I think the most expensive common ones are a really great stroller car seat, because look at those as a combination. You're having to pick this baby up constantly in a car seat. And which is amazing because then a doctor says, you're not supposed to carry more than 30 pounds. And you're like, I'm carrying like 80 pounds with this car, dude. So heavy. So I would spend money there. You will have that set of a stroller car seat for, and especially if you have a second baby, you could have that and use that for 5 years or more. We still have the one from my first daughter. We used it for my baby, my son, who's 18 months, and we still use that whole combination. And so I would either invest in that for yourself or ask a family member to chip in. If you have 10 people in your community that are like, I want to buy something, say, you guys can all put $100 into this. So that special item, you can have your community chip in to support. I think a crib can be really expensive. You can find fancy ones that are convertible that go from, like a baby crib to a toddler bed to sort of like a spaceship, probably. I'm sure they sort of are like crib transformers. And so you can spend a lot of money there if you think strategically about how am I going to use this. But your style changes, and things change and your house changes. So I would just aim for something not super expensive, but something that you like and it fits in with your style. I know then there's the SNOO. You may be able to talk more about that, but there's a rental fee for that. You don't have to pay for it. Those are the two big ones that come to mind as like getting your sort of set up.
Those were my big purchases as well. So the SNOO, so I ended up buying mine used off of Craigslist. So I just looked before our call to see how much they go for new. So
Mm.
they're about $1,700 new, but I found a used SNOO that I got on Craigslist for $400. And I was really,
Oh.
she said when I got there, she was like, it has a little bit of a like sound when you turn it on, but we haven't heard it yet. Maybe at some point I'm going to be like, fuck, I should have just, rented a new SNOO. But I've had a lot of other friends that have had success with just buying a SNOO on Craigslist Marketplace. And I think that, how long do they use the SNOO for? Maximum 6 months, right?
Yeah, probably I know 3 months because the rental is usually 3 months. So those first 3 months, I'm sure.
So I ended up getting mine used. A diaper bag was actually another thing that I spent a good amount of money on. I found a diaper bag that was $250, which in the realm of diaper bags, I don't know if that's expensive or not. I was surprised that I spent that much money. but I'm obsessed with it. I like the way that it looks. It's really big. I think, my husband can wear it. I can wear it. That was
Mm,
another thing that I spent a good amount of money on. Stroller, I ended up getting that a hand-me-down. So it's a really nice stroller. It was from a couple of friends that they decided they wanted one baby, and now their baby's 3 and they don't need the stroller anymore, so we got the stroller and car seat. And I did end up getting a used stroller off of Craigslist for
mm,
Craig because we live on a really like dusty road. So I thought, okay, I'll have one road stroller that's like
mhm,
got really big wheels. It can get dirty, but then I just wanted one to keep in the car. And then mostly everything else was pretty much hand-me-downs. Like, I got a ton of clothes that were hand-me-downs, bouncers. I did buy new bottles and gifts. That was, like, pretty much it. But I would say overall preparing for the stuff component, I would say I spent no more than 2,500 bucks, 2,000,
mhm,
and I was so surprised by that.
yeah, you were expecting more.
I was
Yeah.
expecting more. Do you know approximately how much you spent on stuff before baby came?
So we got a lot of these big ticket items paid for. So we got things like a mamaroo, which is a little thing that rocks the baby. Got the stroller paid for by my mom. That was her gift to us. So I paid for it more the decor. So like the cute new rug, the dresser, some bookshelves, and a must have is a rocking chair. A
Mhm.
comfortable rocker. I still have it. I still rock them. And while I read, it is the best. Like this is the most comfortable rocker, and it's still stylish and looks cute. I think I probably spent around 1,500 on all of those things to just sort of like outfit the room.
Another thing actually that we haven't talked about is getting a doula, because a
Hmm.
doula is also another expense. For those of you that don't know, a doula is just like a labor support person. She normally helps you through the labor and delivery process. I have heard so many wonderful things about doulas, and so when I got pregnant, I knew that was something that I wanted. I know, Christina, you also had a doula. My doula was $1,200. And basically, what that included was a few prenatal visits, her actually supporting me emotionally throughout the entire
Hmm.
birth, as well as one post postnatal. Po-
Hmm. Hmm.
okay,
Hmm.
postnatal
Hmm.
visit as well. Do you remember the investment that you made for your doula?
It was about 1,200, between 1,000 and 1,200, and we went through a doula collective here in Austin. Wonderful group, and I had her for maybe like 4 hours prepartum, and during labor. I had it for like a session before I went into labor, during labor, and then 2 hours or so after postpartum, so that she could help with like breastfeeding and the first latch and things like that.
So that was definitely another expense. And then the last one that we haven't touched on is the actual costs to deliver.
Mhm.
And I was, again, really pleased with this experience because I had no idea how to figure that out. But my first doctor's appointment, when I went to my OBGYN, they basically gave me a printout and they were like, here is your expected out of pocket cost for your labor. And my out of pocket costs were somewhere around $1,200 to $1,500 for everything, which I was pretty pleased with. Now I know that can
Yeah.
obviously change drastically depending on your insurance. Do you remember how much
Yeah.
your out of pocket was?
I want to say it was about 500.
Okay.
And so that was really part of the process as being an employee to understand my benefits. Like I was in a high deductible health insurance plan when I was pregnant. So I wanted to make sure I was in a different plan when the baby came so that delivery costs were, because it would have been a very high delivery cost. So paying attention to that while you're pregnant is important to see. Maybe I need to change my insurance being strategic about when you do that.
And did you talk to your HR? Like, did they help you navigate that decision? Or did you have to do a bunch of research on your own to figure that out?
I would say that HR is good at sort of saying, here are the materials and now sort of self navigate. But it was a lot. I remember analyzing all of these insurance plans and it's like sometimes Greek to me, like what are all these different things mean, all the different tiers. So I remember sitting down with my husband and just sort of analyzing what is the most like not just cost effective, but like for delivery, but also in the long term, like what is the best health insurance plan? Because then you're going to put your children on that plan. And so that was important that I was just analyzing that. And HR kind of helps, but you can also talk to your insurance provider and they will outline what are all the different options you have available.
Yeah, I think that's a really great piece of advice. So for those of you that do have a high deductible health plan, it could be a really good idea to look at the PPO or HMO or those other options available for you. So you can potentially save money on your labor and delivery. And like Christina said, eventually have more comprehensive coverage. I was covered through Craig's health insurance. And
Mm.
so he already had the PPO, the top plan. So we just ended up staying with that. But yeah, I do think if you have a high deductible health plan, that could be a really smart. I want to ask if you did any financial preparation before maternity leave for some of these expenses, or did you just cover them as they came up? How did you financially navigate?
I don't think I planned for it. I'll be totally honest. I don't think that I put a budget together in the way that I might do that now for sort of like remodeling a home as an example. And if I were to analyze that, I always saw family having babies as just part of my life and building my family. And I didn't necessarily associate a baby with increased costs and therefore need to budget around. Like I didn't make that thread. Now that I'm a little older and I see life just gets more expensive, I might have approached that differently. But I think that it was just sort of became more fluid and part of our life and sort of made decisions based on how things were evolving.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that is how most people go through preparing for a baby. Because I am obviously a financial person, I had a little bit different experience. And also, thanks for saying that you probably would do it differently now. I think that's good for people to hear. The moment I found out we had a baby, we were getting pregnant, I was like, we're having a money date. We're opening up a savings account. We're going to I decided $700 a month is how much we were going to put in the savings account every single month. And we were going to build up that savings account until right before baby to pay for everything. Because at that point in time, I really did not know how much stuff I would end up getting from friends and family. But I'm really happy I did it that way because that baby savings account ended up covering so many extra things that had I not done that, I don't think I would have been as generous with myself and the self-care that I was able to give myself. So because I decided
Mhm.
early, hey, I'm going to put $700 a month in this savings account. Towards the end, we had a little extra money. So we decided to go on a baby moon and we decided to get massages and I'm doing acupuncture and pelvic floor therapy. I was really happy that I did it that way because I established that savings cadence. It's going to be a very natural transition to going into the expenses that we're going to have for the baby, which we're going to talk about
Mhm.
next, those reoccurring
Mhm.
expenses. And then also some of the future savings goals that we want to have for baby. I really loved the way that actually that turned out for us.
I wish I did that. I think that was so smart to just build that habit. And then you sort of start to see that account grow and then it becomes play money that you can use and do special things that you described. So
Yeah, and my relationship with money is I need to do that for myself. Otherwise, it's very difficult for me to just be like, "Oh, I'm gonna go spend this money this way." I really have to be intentional with this is the money I get to do whatever I want with, and that's
mm,
kind of what that baby account ended up becoming,
mhm,
and I was really
mhm,
thankful that we decided to do that. Now, I will say I did have to cut back on my travel savings to be able to do that. I did
mm.
have to cut back on my discretionary spending in order to do that. But it ended up being, I think, a really great decision for us. So that wraps up part one. And part two of this series, we're actually talking about what it's like during maternity leave when you're off work, some of the new expenses that you have, the identity shift that you experience as a mom, what it's like not to go to work every day if you aren't working. And then we're going to talk about the transition back to work after you are done with maternity leave and potentially sending your kid to daycare. So don't miss this follow-up episode. It will be released next week. If it's been longer than that, you can actually find this episode here. We'll talk to you soon.